All right. I'm Joe Turner, and this is the City Manager Unfiltered podcast, a podcast for city managers and other public sector executives. It is the most influential local government podcast in America, and I'm excited to be here with you today. This is technically the second episode of year two. June 14th was the 1 year anniversary of the podcast, and I didn't really get into it in the last episode with Scott Jorgensen about what a wonderful year it was, but I'll hopefully unpack that a little bit in this episode because we're going to do a little bit of a comparison between what I've been doing and what the ICMA is doing, because in the larger, broader context of this conversation, I want to talk about ICMA CEO Marc Ott and why I think he should be terminated by the executive board. And I'm honestly not sure why more people aren't publicly calling for his termination. I think his tenure has been an absolute joke over the last couple of years. Obviously, the lion's share of my criticism revolves around how the James Freed situation has been handled. So we're going to unpack that a little bit, and we're also going to unpack a few other issues. But the reason why we're having this conversation today in this special episode is that this week, the ICMA Executive Board is meeting in Philadelphia to have their regional quarterly meeting or whatnot of the board. And this comes just a couple weeks after James Freed and his attorneys won a victory in court against the ICMA regarding his lawsuit against the ICMA for defamation of character. So I felt now would be a good opportunity after, this case has been going on for literally 2 years. You gotta remember, James Freed was publicly censured in June of 2022 by the ICMA. So this matter's been dragged out now for 2 years. And I think now's a good time to talk about it. I think now's a good time to really put a spotlight on Marc Ott. We haven't really done that here on the podcast. I haven't really called him out specifically. I've criticized the ICMA, and I've criticized him at times, but I've never called, to my recollection, for his termination. And I think now's a good time to do that. They're meeting up now on the heels of this most recent defeat. This case is going to go to trial unless the ICMA writes a 7-figure check to James Freed. Believe that. This case is going to trial, and if the ICMA Executive Board wants to do any sort of damage control whatsoever to what's going on with this organization, they need to fire Marc Ott, and they need to take control of the situation and figure out what they got to do to make James Freed and his attorneys happy, because as this case moves forward, it's only going to get more and more ugly for the ICMA. I personally can't wait for it to go to trial because I will be there in person, attending it, doing a daily report, and I will give you guys all the updates. If this thing goes to trial, we're going to get our hands on all the depositions that the ICMA is hiding. And the reality is if this goes to trial, all you dues-paying members of the ICMA, you're going to learn the truth about what really happened. That's the reality. And I don't think the executive board really wants this to go to trial. I think the latest defeat in court was the last Hail Mary attempt to try to stop this from going to trial and trying to basically win this on a technicality, and it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. It's interesting. I haven't talked about this, and nobody else I've seen talked about this, is that the most recent meeting of the executive board, right, back in March, they actually had an interesting item on the agenda that talked about indemnification and insurance for executive board members, because clearly some of them already are, who have been named in the James Freed lawsuit, as well as other members who have not and have just come on the board. They're concerned about their personal liability. It is my understanding that some of these individuals who have been named personally in the James Freed lawsuit, who are sitting on the executive board, are fearing for their own financial futures because they have financial risk when it comes to this lawsuit. It was a really intriguing observation that no one's talked about in March. When you go back, you can go online right now. You can look at the March agenda for the executive board meeting, and you can see they were talking about indemnification for executive board members. Now, why would they be talking about that? Because obviously some of them right now are facing a potential loss in court. But before we unpack the whole reasons why I think Marc Ott should be terminated and why the executive board needs to take over and do damage control, I wanted to give you a quick update on the American Association of Municipal Executives. Man, it's been an amazing week. Obviously, there's a little bit of difficulties and hiccups when you're doing a launch of a new venture, and we've encountered our fair share with some email deliverability issues and what have you. But man, I've been blown away by the positive feedback and words of encouragement I've been getting from the new founding members who have signed up. It's just been a blast. I'm so excited about what the future holds for this organization. I'm so excited about having a professional association out there that stands up for you, the public sector executive as a professional, as a person, an organization that's going to be truly committed to championing you, working for you, advocating for you, helping with your personal and professional development, building that community, building that sense of connectedness. And it's already starting, right? So we got some ground floor members. We got people who've already signed up. We have people who are trickling in. And you have a very limited time to get in on the ground floor and become a founding member. We're going to be shutting the doors to the founding members in mid-July. I'll get you an official date at a later date. But we are going to be closing the doors to founding members in the very near future. Not only do you have the opportunity to get in on the ground floor and help shape what this organization is going to look like and help shape what public administration is going to look like in the future, right? You have literally a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to be a part of something historic here with the American Association of Municipal Executives. By getting as a founding member, you are going to be locked in on future benefits that only founding members are going to have. I'm talking about future discounts, founding member discounts, access, priority access, exclusive access. If you've been following me for any length of time and you support what I'm doing, you support the mission statement of the American Association of Municipal Executives, and you think public sector executives deserve to have an organization that's going to fight for them, you need to get in now. You need to get in the ground floor. You need to be part of this movement, and you're not going to regret it. You're not going to regret it. I'm not sure if I should do this, but I'm so stoked about it. I'm not going to name any names, but I'm going to share this tidbit of news. So literally a couple hours ago, I had a city manager call me up. The city manager is in a city with a population north of 500,000, right? We're talking top 40 population in the country, big time. This is a big time city manager, big time city. And this city manager and I, we have a relationship. And he calls me up and he says, "Hey, Joe, I just want to congratulate you on the launch of the AME. I've been watching what you're doing. I'm so excited about what you're doing. I just wanted to congratulate you. And I also wanted to let you know that I'm signing up to be a member." And I was blown away by it because it's one thing to receive the praise and congratulations from another city manager. It's another thing entirely for a big-time city manager such as this gentleman to join the organization. I just couldn't be more happy and more excited and just super stoked about what is going on with the American Association of Municipal Executives. So I'm just going to throw this out there one more time. I'm going to challenge all of you. If you really like what I've been doing, if you've been following me for the last 18 months or so on this incredible journey, I invite you to join myself, Micah Gaudet, Brandon Dross. We're starting something historic. It's amazing. It's exciting. And I would love to have you be a part of it. So please go to aame.org and sign up today. And if you have any issues, please reach out to me. And I hope to see you on the inside because we already have some folks in there, and we're having a blast. And we're going to continue to do great work for the professional management community. Now let's turn our attention back to Marc Ott and the ICMA and why I believe the executive board, which is meeting in Philadelphia this weekend, should terminate Marc Ott. And there's several different areas I'm going to focus on. And they're not really ranked in order of importance per se, except for the last one. And I'm going to save the whole James Freed situation for last. But I'm going to talk about the international component of the ICMA and its sort of its fixation with growing the international aspect of the organization. I have some heartburn with that. I think that's an issue within the organization, also as it relates to how it takes care of and provides assistance to American city managers. I want to talk about the rigged elections for the executive board. We talked about that in detail with Graham Mitchell back in a previous episode of the podcast, but I want to delve into that a little bit more, especially in the context of voter turnout. I want to talk about how membership has become extremely watered down under Marc's tenure and how the city managers and their voice have really been diminished and minimized because of this watered down aspect of the membership. Fourth, I want to talk about the DEI political aspects of the organization. Everyone knows that the ICMA has veered off to the left. We've talked about that a little bit in the Ed Meese podcast, a little bit in the Graham Mitchell podcast, and I want to share some thoughts on the whole DEI leftist political bent of the ICMA. Fifth, the way the ICMA communicates with its members and externally to its stakeholders is terrible. It's mediocre at best. And I think that deserves some exploration. And then finally, we're going to get into the granddaddy, the number one reason why I think Marc Ott should be terminated. Make no bones about it. It's the way James Freed has been treated. It's how Marc Ott's handled this entire situation surrounding James Freed. And really the blatant disregard and doubling down, this complete arrogance and hubris when it comes to Marc Ott and the ICMA's actions with respect to how it's handled James Freed since he's filed the lawsuit. Now, before we get into the whole breakdown of each of these different categories I just set out, I want to talk in the macro sense of accountability, job performance, metrics, what have you, when it comes to the executive director of the ICMA. On what basis, what measurement, what metric should you as an ICMA member or you as an ICMA executive board member, what should you use to assess Marc Ott's performance? How do you know he's doing a good job? How do you know if he's doing a bad job? What are these metrics? You know, this is a pretty fascinating discussion because really when you think about it, it's essential to have a definition of what the metrics are. In fact, I've talked about this with city managers before on LinkedIn about, you know, when you go into a performance review, an annual review, what are the metrics being used to measure your performance? What fascinates me most about Marc Ott and the ICMA is there really is no way to track his performance in any meaningful, substantive way other than broad sort of assessments, okay, like the James Freed case. When you go and you look at the ICMA's website, the annual report, which would be the number one, I guess, source of information for which you could maybe look at. Now, mind you, the ICMA annual report is going to be put together by staff. It's obviously going to be put together in such a way as to paint a rosy picture, right? Staff is creating this document ostensibly to put the best foot forward, right? And, you know, we do that ourselves as city managers on, you know, when we report to our governing bodies and what have you. I'm not knocking Marc on that. I'm just simply saying that the annual report is kind of like the most rosy picture you're going to get. It's naturally going to be pro-administration, pro-staff in the job that they're doing. But how the hell do you as a member of the ICMA assess the performance of your executive director and the organization's leadership when you don't have an annual report that's published, and when they are published, the metrics that are used change from year to year, so you can't even do a year-over-year comparison to assess performance? Such is the case with ICMA. The ICMA annual report right now, the last one that's available is for 2022. Now, the 2022 fiscal year for the ICMA ended in June of 2022. That's how, I mean, we have not had any annual reports or any assessment of the organization by the executive director or the leadership team since that annual report was published. I don't know when the annual report was published, but it only goes back to the organization circa June of 2022. The 2023 fiscal year is going to be over in 10 days, and we still do not have an annual report for 2023. Now, if you don't have annual reports and you don't have data, how do you measure performance? We don't even know how many members are in the organization. We don't know if membership's gone up or if it's gone down. So even the most basic measure of an organization, right, membership growth, we have no way of knowing. So I don't want the audience to think that I'm just cherry picking 5 categories. We have nothing to look at. There's nothing from the annual reports for over a year and a half, essentially, that basically gives us any information. And so I am left with picking these categories that resonate with me, that I feel are important, and that's why I'm going to break down Marc Ott's performance on these different areas. So let's talk about international development. I am not sure why the ICMA has such a hard-on for the international audience of members. I don't know where this comes from. It used to be very prominently featured, I think, on the homepage where it talked about the international I, and ICMA stands for international. And it's crazy to me that, and again, I got to be fair to Marc here because I think a lot of this stuff predates him. I don't think he's responsible for some of the things I'm really annoyed about when it comes to the international component. But I do think that during his administration, during his tenure with the ICMA, they have made a hard push on the international development component, and so he can be graded on that. Whether or not you agree with my grade or how I got to the grade is another story. But here's the deal. The ICMA has 18 regular board seats, and yet it allocates 3 of those, 1/6 of them, or 17% of the board seats, to a foreign audience that only comprises 3% of the total population of ICMA membership. Total population of ICMA membership, not ICMA members in service, right? Because there's in-service members, and then there's the non-in-service members, a really fluffy category. But here's the deal. You have 13,000 members. At last check, there was roughly 13,000 members of the ICMA. That's the number that's bandied about. And roughly 3% of that number consists of foreign members, international members. That's only 400 people. Literally, we're talking about 400 people. And out of those 400 people, what percentage of those are from Canada? I would love to know. I would bet you odds are the lion's share from Canada, right? We have no idea knowing. I've never seen the international numbers broken down by country or by region, by continent, nothing. But again, logic dictates that the lion's share of those 400 should be Canadians. So you take out the Canadians and you take out the Americans. How many of those 400 people are really an international audience outside of North America? And yet the ICMA is spending so much time and resources going out there, going on these international junkets, going on these trips, these really fancy trips, these little golfing expeditions. And for what? What are your membership dues being paid for, and why? What is the end game here? Meanwhile, over the last 18 months or so that I've been actively posting on LinkedIn, I could probably point to 24 cities and counties across the country, across the United States, who are going through council manager form of government discussions, right? This is where they're either deciding to adopt the council manager form of government or abandon the council manager form of government. I read hundreds of articles a month over the last 2 years, literally hundreds a month. I have never seen in this entire time, I have not seen one article mentioning the ICMA with any defense or protection or articulation of a defense of the council manager form of government in any of these communities. Now, if they're advocates for the profession, if they're advocates for the council manager form of government, where are they? What are they doing? What metric are we using to assess the performance? I can tell you, as somebody who's not a member of the ICMA, not plugged into the inside, I don't have an annual report to refer to, correct? I can only tell you that me, and you guys know I'm a voracious reader, that I read tons of articles. It's clear that I'm not lying on that. I've never seen the ICMA mentioned in an article when it comes to a city or county defending or possibly abandoning the council manager form of government. So what are they doing? On top of that, you got American managers who are getting vilified and crucified on a weekly basis in this country. The ICMA can't be bothered, right? And we've already established, I'm not going to beat this drum. I've already talked about this in episode 50 of the podcast for why we started AAME. But the ICMA can't be bothered to defend or protect city managers who are going through these hellacious situations, oftentimes with governing bodies who are breaking the law, okay? They're nowhere to be found on defending the council manager form of government. But, but there's plenty of resources to send members on junkets to Saudi Arabia and these other countries in the name of international development of the ICMA. It makes no sense to me. If you guys think that ICMA should be focused on the international development, and we can agree to disagree on that, right? That's fine. What metric are you using to assess his performance on the international development component? Every time I've looked at an annual report that has an international number available for the members, it's stuck at 3%. It's stuck at 3%. So what metric are you using? Is it the number of golf courses visited in another country? I'd love to know. I'm not trying to be snarky, but what is the metric that the ICMA executive board uses to determine whether or not the CEO of the organization is doing his job and securing results when it comes to international development of membership? I think that's a fair question to ask. Now let's talk about the rigged elections on the executive board. And again, I just went through a very extensive conversation with Graham Mitchell. I think it was episode 52 of the podcast. I'm not going to get into that here. Once again, I don't think it's necessarily fair to criticize Marc Ott when it comes to the election process. I don't think he was involved in that. I think that all predates him. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that all predates Marc Ott. So I'm not going to blame Marc Ott for the rigged process that determines who gets on the executive board. And again, just for those who are late to the party, who didn't hear the first episode, here's how it works. The ICMA has set up a process where anybody who wants to be on the executive board must be vetted by a group of insiders. Those insiders, they decide who the nominee is going to be on the ballot. And there's only one. And then you have the privilege, the ICMA gives you the privilege each year of voting for the only person on the ballot you can vote for. And yay, democracy, yay, transparency, yada, yada, yada. That is the state of ICMA executive board elections at this current time. It is a total sham. But okay, that's the process. And again, I don't think Marc Ott's responsible for the process, but let's talk about voter turnout. Should Marc Ott be held accountable for voter turnout of the membership? I would think that would be something that you might want to measure his performance on, right? Maybe that's part of the communications to the stakeholders, to the membership. If turnout is dropping, that should be a bad sign, I would think. If turnout is increasing, that should be a good sign, I would think. Okay, so let's look at turnout. Let's go back to 5 years ago for the 2020 election results. 5 years ago in the 2020 election, 2,498 votes were cast for the executive board. That's 2,498 members cast a vote. Okay? Last year, that number had dropped to 2,158 votes. Now get this. This week, they just made an announcement of the election results for 2024. So this is the fifth election cycle, right? 5 years later. Guess how many votes were cast in this election for the executive board? Only 1,931. You've had well over a 20% drop in the turnout of members for the executive board elections. Now, that doesn't seem like a good sign to me. That doesn't suggest to me that the organization's healthy, that members are engaged. So is that a fair critique of the CEO? Is it fair to make an assessment of their performance based on the turnout of the membership? I think so. I will leave it to you, the listener, to decide whether or not you agree with me or not. Let's talk about watered down membership. Now, this is where I do think you can put a lot more blame on Marc, because it is my understanding that under his leadership, there has been an aggressive push to water down the membership to allow basically anybody with an IQ north of 2 who can fog a mirror access to the organization, that they can be a member. I question the logic of that decision, and that is being polite. There's a lot of people who have talked to me on background who believe that this is nothing more than a money grab to increase membership dues in the organization, and that there's no benefit to the members, to the real members, right? The main members that this organization should be focused on, that's the city and county managers. So we have an organization that has approximately 13,000 members. Again, I don't know what the current number is. There's no annual report, and we'll get to that. Only about 40% of those 13,000 members are in the executive suite. That means they are either city managers, county managers, or the assistant or deputy city county manager equivalent of their organization. So only 40% of the 13,000 folks who are members of this organization are in the executive suite. Now, putting aside for a second my contention that this may be a money grab, this might just be used to get more dollars into the organization, let's put that aside for a second. City and county managers are the only members of this organization who must abide by all 12 tenets of the ICMA Code of Ethics. Not even the assistant or deputy city managers and county managers are required to abide by all 12 tenets of the Code of Ethics. I've been told that repeatedly by members, okay? People who are upset with this whole thing. You can correct me if I'm wrong. I've been saying this many times over the last 18 months and no one has corrected me yet. But only city managers, only county managers are responsible for upholding all 12 tenets. So why in the hell do members who are not public sector executives get to vote and pass rules that they are not required to follow? Why has the executive director who has served as a city manager allowed the voice of the city and county managers in this organization? This organization was set up for them, right? Why is he allowing their voices to get drowned out by those who do not bear the burden and obligations of sitting in the chair? Now, if you want to water down membership so that any Tom, Dick, and Harry can sign up and become a member of the ICMA and you want to gobble up membership dues, okay, that's fine, whatever. Why are you not restricting who can and can't vote on the Code of Ethics or on certain tenets of the Code of Ethics, let's put it that way? Why should a member who is not responsible for upholding a certain tenet be allowed to vote on the language in that tenet? You guys have to realize that over the last 2 years, and especially the last couple months, I've talked to dozens upon dozens of managers, current and former members of the ICMA, people who have never been members of the ICMA, and there is a persistent frustration with this idea that people can walk into the organization who have never sat in the chair and get to vote on matters that do not concern them, but that other city managers have to abide by. I don't think the ICMA Executive Board, I don't think Marc Ott are in tune with the membership on this issue, or at least in my opinion, the membership that should matter, right? And I think the membership that should matter are the city and county managers, and then to a lesser degree, the assistants and deputies, right? Now, if this is not an appropriate metric upon which to judge the performance of the CEO, I don't know what is. I don't know what is. So you can disagree with me, and that's fine. We'll agree to disagree. But I stridently believe that the organization should do more to strengthen the voice of city and county managers. It should do more to hear the voices of city and county managers. And I believe that this CEO has minimized and diminished the voice of city and county managers. And frankly, it's unacceptable, at least to me. But I don't have to worry about that because I'm not a member of the ICMA. I'm a founding member of the AAME. And with the American Association of Municipal Executives, I've been very clear, Micah and Brandon and I have been very clear, that the city and county manager, the public sector executive, the leader of the organization is always going to come first, and every decision that we make is going to be run through the litmus test of whether or not it's to the benefit or detriment of the city and county manager. All right, let's turn to the leftist political agenda and DEI issues that's caused a lot of heartburn with some of the managers I've spoken to. And frankly, they're just tired of the leftist political agenda. They want an organization that is nonpartisan, apolitical, that focuses on helping them as managers. I've had countless individuals tell me on background that they're tired of the leftist political agenda pushed by the ICMA. And there is a pervasive dissatisfaction within the ranks of small town and rural managers who believe the ICMA offers little, if any, value to them. It shouldn't be lost on those listening to this podcast that many of these small town rural managers work in conservative areas. Ed Meese talked about his frustration in a recent episode of the podcast when he attended his last conference in 2015. And Graham Mitchell shared in our interview about how he had attended the Portland conference, and whenever there was leftist political issues being pushed by the speaker at the conference, he would hear groans by people seated around him expressing their frustration. And a quick aside, why is an organization that supposedly advocates and staunchly defends the council manager form of government holding conferences in cities that have the strong mayor form of government? It's just so annoying. I've talked about this before on posts and what have you. They should be having conferences in cities with a council manager form of government. Period. But anyway, getting back to the political issues, many managers have confided in me their opposition to the Black Lives Matter agenda and vehemently opposed the special edition of the PM magazine that went out a couple of years ago that lectured and hectored managers about race politics. I've had managers tell me that if their elected officials saw that magazine edition or some of the other rhetoric that's pushed out by the ICMA, it would cause major problems for them. And they wouldn't be able to defend it in their communities. It would cause a lot of issues. I don't think many of you listening are aware of the fact that there is a massive discontent with Marc Ott and the organization over DEI issues. I've seen many emails and letters that were sent to and from ICMA executive board members, staff, and concerned members. This is all from 2020, 2021. If you guys remember, I've talked about the disgruntled ICMA spouse. That person sent me a treasure trove of emails and communications between staff and members of the ICMA about the DEI. In fact, they put together a summit of sorts, I think, to try to hammer out and reach some sort of consensus. But I don't think a lot of people were satisfied by that, to be honest. Anyway, this is all from after the George Floyd riots, and it predates my arrival on the scene here. But the ICMA staff is riddled with leftist bias in its ranks, and the executive board has been complicit in allowing it to go unchecked. Okay, so Martha Perego, the so-called ethics guru, was caught supporting leftist politicians and policies while using the ICMA ethics Twitter handle by James Freed. Now imagine this. You got Martha Perego using @ICMA ethics on Twitter, going around supporting leftist policies and leftist politicians. James Freed says, hey, you can't be doing that, calls her out in a letter to Marc Ott, and that's what sets this whole thing in motion as far as him being publicly censured and targeted for professional assassination by the staff at the ICMA. Apparently, she was given a slap on the wrist. I'm not sure exactly what that means, other than she had to delete some posts or change her Twitter handle. I'm not sure exactly how much of a slap on the wrist that was or what the punishment truly was, because at the end of the day, and we'll come back to this later in the podcast, not only was she feted with an awesome retirement luncheon at the conference in Austin back in October, they just named an award after her a couple months ago, and we're going to get back to that. So you have ICMA members who are routinely contributing to Democrat candidates. This includes senior leadership listed on the Form 990. One was campaigning for Hillary Clinton back in 2016, and one was also campaigning and supporting Beto O'Rourke. You also have Marc Ott's chief of staff, Ray Barret, donating money to President Biden's campaign when he was running. And you have Democrat. He also had Ray Barret supporting Democrat PACs going back to his days of working with Marc Ott when Marc Ott was the city manager in Austin. So you have Ray Barret, who's been an ICMA member since, I think, 2009, and now is the number 2 ranking person within the organization, has a pattern of donating to Democrat causes, which is completely violates the Tenet 7 of the ICMA Code of Ethics. And nothing happens. There's no accountability. Nothing done by Marc Ott when it comes to the shenanigans of these employees that are engaging in political activity. How can an organization that supposedly prides itself on the Code of Ethics, right, sets it apart from any other organization, Tenet 7, do not engage in partisan political activity, so forth and so on, how can it be littered with higher-ups who flagrantly engage in this sort of conduct and nothing happens? Barret violates the Code of Ethics, no punishment. Doesn't get fired, doesn't get suspended, doesn't get rebuked. There's no statement. I mean, I'm assuming there's no statement made. Nothing. There's no accountability to the members of the organization. There is no sense of we are going to hold ourselves to the same standards we expect our managers to hold themselves to. And then when it comes to accountability, you have Martha Perego and Jessica Cowles engaging in a personal partisan political vendetta against James Freed because they didn't like his stance on the COVID vaccine mandate and his taking a victory lap when he stuck it in the face of Democrat Governor Gretchen Whitmer. We'll come back to that. What is most incredible to me about this entire situation is that the executive board is completely clueless and unable to connect the dots. Do you naively think that the Code of Ethics can be weaponized against a member and that this information about the leftist political agenda of the ICMA can't be weaponized and used against the organization? The managers I speak to want a truly nonpartisan and apolitical organization that's focused on helping them be better managers. They want the ICMA to get out of the politics and to focus on the manager. Let's assess the ICMA's communication efforts under the leadership of Marc Ott. We can break this down into a couple of different areas, okay? So I'm going to break this down into member communication, external communications, social media, and then multimedia, all right? First, let's start with member communication. You have the website. You might think it's ticky-tack, and maybe it is. I don't know. But how can the Constitution, right? You're talking about the main navigation bar. It goes to the Constitution of the organization. How is it that for 2 years, it can say that the most recent amendment of the Constitution occurred in 2011 and not 2020? I finally had enough, and I pointed this out on LinkedIn a couple of days ago, and within hours, the website had been changed and corrected. But how does that happen? Does the CEO, none of the staff, none of the executive board members go and look at the actual Constitution page of their website and notice that it says, hey, the last update to the Constitution was back in 2011, and it's like that for 2 years? Again, maybe it's ticky-tack, but I think it's emblematic of laziness, sloppiness, lack of accountability under the leadership of Marc Ott. Now, I will concede that maybe that last point was ticky-tack about the Constitution, but I'm not going to concede that on this case. And now we're going to talk about the annual report again. When you go to the annual reports page, the last one is 2022, as I talked about earlier. The 2021, you can't even access. The link doesn't work. It doesn't go to anywhere. So you have a 22 annual report, and then you have a 2020 annual report, and then you have the 2019, and I think the 2018. And all 4 of those annual reports have a different structure, different metrics. You can't do a year-over-year comparison. But how is it that the ICMA cannot provide an annual report in a timely manner? And how is it that they can't provide a consistent structure so that the members, the dues-paying members, can't actually look at the results and determine whether or not progress is being made on a year-over-year basis? How is it that the annual report for 2021 can have a dead link on it for 2+ years? I don't even know how far back it goes. How about this aspect of member communications? How much about the James Freed situation has the ICMA ever communicated to the members of the ICMA? Probably next to none, right? The only way members of the ICMA are hearing about the James Freed situation is through this podcast and my post, I'm pretty sure. Now, I would think that if a member of the ICMA was suing the ICMA and the exec board, that perhaps the members should have a right to know about that. I think that the ICMA should have disclosed that information to the members of the organization And I think they should have provided regular updates to the members of the organization about this lawsuit. We're not talking about a lawsuit between the organization and a vendor. We're not talking about a lawsuit involving an employee getting into a car accident. We are talking about an actual member who was publicly censured by this organization suing the ICMA for a conspiracy to commit defamation against him, and there's no communication with the members. That is not acceptable. How can an organization that supposedly prides itself on transparency and accountability not be transparent with its own members when it comes to disclosing the James Freed lawsuit? Now, I think the communication between the ICMA staff and Marc Ott and the members isn't very good. But again, I'm also not an ICMA member, so you are free to disagree with me and say, you know what, Joe, I think Marc Ott's doing a great job when it comes to communication with the members. What about external communications? Let's talk about press releases and defending the council manager form of government. When you go to the ICMA website and look at the page for press releases, the last press release was more than 2 years ago. How is it that an organization with a $35 million annual budget, a $600,000 a year CEO, I'm sure well over 100 employees, how is it that that organization cannot put out a press release for 2+ years? Are they not doing anything? Is there nothing to report? Surely, all those 24 or so cities and counties that have been going through a discussion about the council manager form of government, surely there's a place for the ICMA to get involved and put a press release out to one of those situations, right? I mean, they are staunch defenders of the council manager form of government. Surely the ICMA could put out something regarding James Freed, but wait for it. I'm a little curveball here. I'm not even going to talk about the lawsuit between James Freed and the ICMA. What about the Supreme Court case that James Freed is involved in when it comes to social media and Facebook and what have you? That's gone all the way to the Supreme Court. You don't think the ICMA can put out a press release or talk something about that when it comes to the importance of privacy and whatnot to city managers? They're not trying to get any earned media on behalf of their members. They're not trying to be advocates at all for the profession or the professionals. Nothing's going on there. There's no sort of external communication. What does the comms team at ICMA do? What do? They don't update the websites. They don't put out an annual report. They don't put out press releases. They don't defend the council manager form of government anywhere. And again, I challenge you, if you disagree with me, go find some articles over the last couple of years that mention the ICMA in any context of defending the council manager form of government. I want you to go back and scan the LinkedIn feed for the ICMA. I want you to tell me how many bullshit posts they have about solar power, economic mobility, yada, yada, yada. And now I want you to go and look at how many posts do you see about the ICMA getting involved in any fight to protect or defend the council manager form of government. You probably have a weekly post about solar power. Why? A weekly post about solar power, nothing about the council manager form of government anywhere across the country. Speaking of social media and LinkedIn, let's talk about that. So that's the third component of the communications puzzle, Facebook. If you scroll down the ICMA's Facebook page, you can go dozens of posts, and they all have 0 to 1 or maybe 2 acts of engagement. Hardly ever will you ever find a comment. In fact, the comments I saw were looked like bots or spam bots. Twitter is even worse. I mean, it's absolute crickets. There's literally no engagement on Twitter. I don't even know why I don't even know why ICMA is putting up Twitter posts when no one's even responding or engaging whatsoever. And let's talk about LinkedIn. You're lucky if you find a post that has more than a dozen people engaging with it. LinkedIn analytics show that the engagement on my posts are astronomical compared to the ICMA. I don't know how many impressions the ICMA posts get. You got to remember, ICMA has over 50,000 followers on LinkedIn. I've had a fraction of that time. I've caught up, obviously, over time because now I'm up to close to 15,000. As recently as a year ago, when I launched this podcast on June 14th, I had 5,000 followers, and I built that from scratch. I have damn near close to 7 million impressions on my posts from the last 365 days. I don't know what the ICMA does. I don't have the ability to look at those metrics. I can only see the engagement. And my engagement dwarfs the LinkedIn engagement for ICMA. If you go down and look at the ICMA post on LinkedIn, there's nothing going on. So let's turn to multimedia now. Let's look at their YouTube page, their YouTube account, and the podcast. YouTube is terrible. Okay, guys? I mean, the YouTube account for the ICMA is so mediocre, it's embarrassing. They have put out 39 videos since January 1 of 2023. So in roughly a year and a half, they've put out 39 videos. None of these videos have more than 500 views. They average, and this isn't rounding, this is literally the average, they average 150 views per video. I launched a YouTube channel a few months back with no subscribers. I released 5 videos. My second video that I released, I probably had literally 6 subscribers. I released a video, and my second video had 1,500 views, and my 5 videos together averaged over 500 views. If you look at the YouTube history, and I nerded out on this, but I'm gonna bring the facts. Okay, I'm gonna bring the receipts. If you go back and you look at all the videos put out since Marc Ott has become the CEO of the organization, they put out just under 250 videos. Only 8 of those videos have more than 1,000 views. Only 8. Now, I'm not trying to flex. This isn't me trying to brag, stroke my ego. This isn't anything like that at all. I don't want you guys to get it twisted and misunderstand why I'm making this point. Because if you think I'm trying to flex and brag, you're completely missing the point. Here is the point. How is it that some dude that 99.9% of the members of the ICMA had never heard of 2 years ago in Kansas, middle of flyover country Kansas, small town city administrator in a town of 2,500 people with a budget of $7 million, how is it that Joe Turner can absolutely crush and dominate the ICMA comms team when they have paid dedicated staff, multi-million-dollar budget, 100-year plus advantage when it comes to institutional credibility, newsletters, email lists, all that stuff? How is it that Joe Turner can crush the ICMA on every conceivable social media metric? How is that not an indictment on Marc Ott and his team? If Marc Ott and the ICMA were a private business, a for-profit corporation, do you think that the business owners or the board or the shareholders would tolerate paying for a comms team that literally gets 150 views on YouTube videos, that gets literally no engagement on their social media channels? I don't think so. I don't think so. So let's turn to the podcast. According to the most recent annual report, again, the most recent annual report was released in 2022, the ICMA podcast only had 12,000 downloads for the entire year. Right now, as of this moment, the podcast, Voices in Local Government, only has 9 ratings on Apple. My podcast that I started from scratch, again, I had 0 followers back in September of 2022. 0 followers. I had only 5,000 followers in June of 2023 when I launched my podcast. In 1 year, my podcast had 90,000 downloads. It had 215 ratings on Apple, 75 reviews on Apple, 60 ratings on Spotify. Again, I'm not trying to flex. I'm not trying to grandstand. I'm not trying to make this about me or put it on me. I'm asking you, how in the hell is it possible that Joe Turner is crushing the ICMA in all these areas? How is that not an indictment on the $600,000 CEO? How is that not an indictment on an organization with a $35 million annual budget? An organization that has 13,000 paid members, 50,000 followers on LinkedIn. God knows how many thousands of people on email subscription lists that you guys can blast out. You know, the same emails that you blast out where you're pimping out the vendors who are trying to sell their goods and services to the managers left and right. How is it that your social media engagement, your multimedia engagement, your downloads, your listens, how is it so pathetic? And then more importantly, how is it that an organization that has an executive board to hold the CEO accountable, how come there's no one holding him accountable? Is there not any desire at all to get any results? Or are those just acceptable? Put up crap on the social media page, get no engagement, rinse and repeat, send out the biweekly paycheck to the employee, yada, 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 and then rah, rah, rah. There is no way in hell this type of performance in the private sector would be tolerated. So why is it being tolerated? in an organization that is supposed to represent city and county managers? And why are the membership dues that are being paid for by the members, why are they being squandered in such a frivolous manner? The members of this organization deserve better for the dues that they're paying. And we all know that the actual dues are being paid primarily by taxpayers. All right, so let's turn ourselves to the James Freed situation. Before I dive into it, I want to make two things very clear. First, I'm not going to rehash the entire case. For those who are not fully up to speed, you need to go listen to episode 17 and get the full story. That's where James Freed tells his own story in his own words. It's a great interview, covers all the bases. My focus during this segment is going to be on Marc Ott and where he's culpable throughout this entire ordeal. Furthermore, I'm going to provide a bit of an update on the story since the interview with James Freed aired way back in late September, and there's been some court updates since then. Second, Marc Ott and the ICMA Executive Board have had plenty of opportunities to fix this mess. They could have apologized, owned up for their mistakes, and tried to make it right, but instead, they have doubled and tripled down at every turn and dragged one of our peers through the mud for 2 years. I have people who have, been critical of my tone, my lack of professionalism per se. I don't really care. I'm more concerned about why so many people are more concerned about my tone and my so-called unprofessionalism than they are about the actions of their own professional association and how they've treated one of our peers. That's what I'm more concerned about. Why are you more upset with my tone than you are with what your organization's done? And don't give me there's just two sides to every story. Well, why don't you start asking for the side of the story that involves the ICMA? Why aren't you asking the ICMA to release the depositions? Why aren't you hitting them with the hard questions? Everything in those depositions was sworn under oath. Both sides of the case have the depositions. There's no mystery there. There's absolutely no reason why the ICMA can't be transparent with its members on such an important case as this and release the depositions. So don't come at me about my lack of professionalism or my tone when you are silent in respect to asking your own organization where they are at fault. Why aren't you holding these people accountable? The people who you elected, right, in this rigged election to get on the executive board, the people that you elected to get on the executive board, the person that the executive board hired to lead the organization, why aren't you holding them accountable? Instead, you're more concerned about my tone. I wonder if some of you would be a little bit different and have a little bit of a different reaction if James Freed actually lost his job. Is it because he actually didn't lose his job like Daniel Rosemond and go through living hell, so therefore he doesn't warrant your sympathy or warrant your concern, or you're just too busy to really look into it, right? Because we're all super busy. We're all super busy, but yet we're all quick to be criticizing the apathy of the voters in our own communities when they don't turn out to vote, right? We lament the lack of interest in the elections, the apathy, the low voter turnout, and then when it comes to our own organization that represents city managers and county managers across the country, we're busy. It's hard to keep up with all the stuff. We got full-time jobs. These are volunteers on the executive board. I'm sorry. I'm not buying that excuse. So let's get on with Mr. Ott. Here's my beef. Why did Marc Ott allow Jessica Cowles to investigate James Freed not once, but twice when he knew that her boss, Martha Perego, was directly involved and had a conflict of interest in the case? Way back in 2017 or whatever it was when Freed submitted his written complaint to Marc Ott about Perego's Twitter activities, he never asked Marc Ott to conduct an investigation or file an ethics complaint into Perego. He simply asked Marc to handle it. He was trying to be professional, trying to be polite. I think discreet is the right word for it. So he sent that letter to Marc Ott and basically asked him to handle it. He didn't demand an investigation. When Freed later shared his Perego letter on the listserv, someone filed an ethics complaint against him, alleging that he had somehow violated the confidentiality of the process because whenever there's an ethics complaint, it's supposed to be confidential. The only problem is that Freed never filed the complaint. Any complaint that would have been filed by Freed would have been filed with Perego or Cowles. Or it would have been filed through Marc Ott as an intermediary who would have then given it to Perego and Cowles. So why is Cowles spending a 20-minute phone call trying to ensnare and trap Freed into some sort of ethics investigation when time and time again on this recorded phone call, which I played in episode 17, he states over and over that he never filed a complaint on Perego. So if he never filed the complaint, how could he be violating any confidentiality of the complaint process? He didn't even know anything about it. During that phone call, there's some friction a little bit between Freed and Cowles. So question number 2, fast forward to the final investigation and where they actually got Freed, right, on the public censure. Why again did Ott allow Cowles to investigate Freed when he knew there was a previous issue, not only with Perego, but that there was friction between Cowles and Freed after this 20-minute phone call and the dust-up over the original investigation? And then moving on, why did Ott allow Cowles to violate the organization's own investigatory process when she failed to send the Freed matter back to the Michigan State chapter so that they could convene a fact-finding committee? This is something that no one's ever held Ott accountable about when it came to the organization. Why was the process circumvented? The process is supposed to be there to protect the innocence, right? The due process rights of the person accused of wrongdoing. You go to the fact-finding committee in Michigan, the state chapter, and they are supposed to go and get the facts and then report those back to the ethics committee. Why then did Cowles circumvent that process? And why wasn't there any repercussions or consequences? Not only weren't there any repercussions or consequences, Perego and Cowles have been promoted, praised, recognized in every which way since then. Here's some questions I have for the executive board and of Mr. Ott. Prior to the executive board voting to publicly censure Freed, did Marc ever inform the members of the executive board that Perego and Cowles had this conflict of interest with Freed? I think that's relevant information that should be shared. If not, prior to James Freed's appeal hearing before the executive board, did Marc Ott ever inform to the members of the executive board then that Perego and Cowles had conflicts of interest with Freed? Now remember, ICMA staff and executive board members, including Marc Ott, gave sworn depositions well before the annual conference last year. At the conference, Perego was feted with a retirement ceremony. I want you all to remember this when depositions come out at the trial. Not only was Perego honored, Cowles was promoted. Remember that. Now, throughout this entire legal process, the ICMA and its attorneys have stonewalled, used delay tactics, and played other games to drag out the proceedings to hurt Freed. And it reminds me of the very same thing that the Hallandale Beach attorney did with our buddy Daniel Rosemond. You remember how they played games with Daniel Rosemond? They delayed, dragged it out. That's exactly what your own organization, the ICMA, that you paid dues to, is doing to one of your peers. Is that how you would want to be treated? Is that how you, a city manager who might be required to be an ICMA member in your contract, do you want to be treated that way if the code of ethics is weaponized against you by an ethics staffer who's putting their own personal and political agenda ahead of that of the organization? In April of 2023, a judge signed an order compelling the executive board members to turn over documents during discovery. These executive board members were refusing to do as required by the court. Can you believe that? Think about that for a second. You have members of the executive board who are refusing to turn over documents and communications as required by the court, and it's so bad that literally James Freed's attorneys have to go back to the court and have the judge write an order compelling them to do so, giving them a 30-day warning that if they don't do it, there's going to be consequences. This is what's going on with your executive board. You throw in the multiple motions by the ICMA attorneys to delay and move the proceedings out of the different courts and try to play games in that way. After the annual conference, right? So after the annual conference in October, Marc Ott and the ICMA and the executive board, they weren't chastised. They weren't like, oh, the stove's hot here. Maybe we need to dial this back. Nope. The ICMA attorneys decided about, I think, 3 days in the judge's order, something like 3 days before a final deadline, and we can move this case into an actual trial. What do they decide to do? Play another game and try to move the case out of the current court it was in to another district court. And what did happen? James Freed's attorney, they fought it, and the judge sided with James Freed and his attorneys. So that happened a couple weeks ago. Are you guys just going to tolerate your CEO and your executive board and their attorneys playing these games against one of your peers who's been so mistreated? I mean, just completely mistreated, treated like none of us would ever want to be treated, and yet it's just allowed to happen. There's no consequences. Maybe we need to. Maybe I need to dial it back and not have a knee-jerk reaction and be patient. Let the executive board, weigh the merits of Marc Ott's tenure and do a review of his performance. What are we talking about? And I want you to remember this. I want you to remember this. When this thing's all done, when this is all said and done, if this goes to court and all the documents get released to the public, which I hope is what happens, I want you all to remember this. Marc Ott and the ICMA in March of this year decided to name an award after Martha Perego. What do they call it? The Advocacy for the Profession Award. Can you believe that bullshit? Can you believe that bullshit? Every time Marc Ott, the ICMA Executive Board, have had an opportunity to reel us back in, to try to make amends, to try to make it right, to do right by one of our city managers who has been wrongfully abused by the ethics process that's been weaponized, they have doubled and tripled down. So no, I don't really want to hear any complaints about my tone, my professionalism, about being clickbaitish. No, that's unacceptable. That is not an acceptable criticism. What is appropriate would be for members of the ICMA to stand up and demand the release of the depositions given by all the ICMA staffers and executive board members. What would be appropriate is for members of the ICMA to ask the incoming executive board members who were just elected this week and confirmed, ask them if they've read the depositions, if they've been given copies of the depositions. What would be appropriate is for members of the ICMA to ask how much of the organization's money has been spent on legal bills fighting this case for over a year. That would be an appropriate question. An appropriate question for ICMA members would be, what are the insurance limits on the organization in this lawsuit? And what exposure does the organization have if James Freed takes us all the way to court and wins that trial? That would be an appropriate question. Another appropriate question would be, where in the hell is the annual report for 2023? When are we going to get it? And when are we going to get some clarity about the metrics we're using to evaluate the performance of our CEO? Those are appropriate questions that ICMA members should be asking. And I don't hear very many people asking questions. So I conclude with this. On what metric does Marc Ott deserve to retain his position as the ICMA CEO? What has he done to merit continued employment with the organization? I would love to know what the members of the ICMA are using as their metrics for grading his performance. If the executive board is smart, they will begin doing damage control immediately, and they will terminate Marc Ott so that the healing can begin and that they can start fixing the mess that has been created under his leadership. I think James Freed has been wronged. It's egregious what has happened to him. It's unacceptable. It's shameful. And for those reasons, I think Marc Ott should be terminated immediately. And I think the executive board should think very long and hard about entering into some sort of settlement negotiations with his attorney. But at the end of the day, I am not a member of the ICMA. And the real fact of the matter is, the longer Marc Ott stays employed by the ICMA, the easier it is for me to draw distinctions and differentiations between what I'm trying to do with the American Association of Municipal Executives and what the ICMA is doing. So I will leave you all with this final thought. We talk about democracy being a participatory endeavor, that we must be engaged, we must be involved. The same goes for members of the ICMA. There is absolutely nothing stopping you or preventing you as an ICMA member from contacting your executive board members and expressing your frustrations with how James Freed's been treated, expressing your desire and demand to read the transcripts of the depositions that have been given under oath by your elected representatives and your staff members that you pay their salaries of, right? There's nothing prohibiting you from contacting those executive board members and demanding that those depositions be released. There is nothing prohibiting you from contacting your executive board members and weighing in with your displeasure about the current trajectory or direction the organization is headed under the leadership of Marc Ott. My name is Joe Turner. I am the host of the City Manager Unfiltered podcast, the most influential local government podcast in America. Catch you on the next episode.